Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and journey deep into the scorching sands and hidden passages of ancient Egypt. We're not going to talk about pharaohs or pyramids in the usual way, but about a chilling, desperate side of their civilization, the miserable life of a grave robber. Imagine, if you will, the vast, silent necropolis stretching out under the merciless desert sun. Row upon row of tombs, each one filled with unimaginable riches. You hear the ceaseless whisper of the wind, kicking up fine sand, and the distant, unsettling howl of a jackal. But beneath that apparent tranquility, there's a darker hum, the relentless temptation of forbidden wealth, and the terrifying risks taken by those desperate enough to pursue it. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transition. And the tomb was not just a burial place, but a home for eternity. Filled with everything the deceased needed for a prosperous afterlife. This belief led to tombs overflowing with gold, jewels, fine linens, and precious artifacts. This incredible wealth, hidden just beneath the desert surface, became an irresistible magnet for the desperate and the greedy. You probably wouldn't survive a single night as a grave robber in ancient Egypt. The heat, the darkness, the elaborate traps, the vengeful priests, and the brutal punishments would quickly ensure your demise. This was a life lived in constant shadow, where every breath was a gamble against divine wrath and earthly justice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps this little corner of the internet grow, and it lets me know these sleepy historical deep dives are finding their audience. And if you're feeling up to it, drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the edge of the vast, silent necropolis of ancient Egypt, a sprawling city of the dead stretching endlessly under the baking sun. The air shimmers with heat, carrying the dry, dusty scent of ancient stone and sand. Row upon row of mastabas, flat-topped tombs, rock-cut chambers, and the distant, imposing outlines of pyramids pierce the horizon. This is a place steeped in reverence, mystery, and immense wealth, and it's here that you begin to understand the irresistible, yet deadly, allure of its deadly secrets for the ancient Egyptians. The afterlife was not just a hope, it was a certainty, a continuation of earthly existence in a perfected form to ensure this eternal prosperity. The deceased, particularly the wealthy and elite, were buried with everything they might need, not just food and drink, but fine clothing, furniture, precious jewelry, gold and silver vessels, divine amulets, and even chariots and boats for their spiritual journey. Imagine rooms literally overflowing with gold, lapis lazuli, intricately carved ebony, and shimmering fabrics, all meticulously placed to accompany the deceased into eternity. This immense accumulation of wealth within tombs, hidden just beneath the desert's surface, created an almost irresistible temptation for ordinary Egyptians living in a society with vast disparities in wealth, where poverty was rampant for the majority of the population. The riches buried with the dead represented an unimaginable fortune. A single golden bracelet from a nobleman's tomb could feed a family for years, perhaps even buy a better life. This stark contrast between the lavish dead and the struggling living created the perfect environment for the emergence of tomb raiding. Historians widely agree that tomb robbing in ancient Egypt was a persistent and widespread problem throughout much of its history, from the Old Kingdom through the New Kingdom and beyond. Directly fueled by the immense wealth interred with the elite deceased, the very inaccessibility and secrecy of many tombs further fueled the allure. Pharaohs and nobles invested immense resources in designing hidden passages, false walls, and deceptive entrances to protect their burials. This wasn't just about security, it was a challenge, a silent dare to those who might be tempted. The more hidden a tomb, the greater the perceived treasure within, and the more tantalizing the prospect for the desperate few willing to risk everything. Imagine the thrill and the terrifying risk of deciphering ancient architectural puzzles, knowing untold riches awaited on the other side. The remoteness of the necropolis also played a role. Many major burial grounds, like the Valley of the Kings, were located far from settled communities, in desolate desert wadis. While this offered some protection from casual intrusion, it also created isolated environments where clandestine operations could thrive under the cloak of darkness. Away from watchful eyes, you wouldn't just stumble upon a grave robber's hideout. You'd have to seek it out in the lonely wilderness. A particularly grim, yet common detail was the practice of reusing older tombs. Sometimes, grave robbers were not just breaking into pristine burials. They might discover an older, previously plundered tomb that still held some overlooked treasures, or perhaps they simply needed a place to hide their illicit gains, turning a desecrated grave into a temporary hideout. This layering of historical plunder created a complex archaeological challenge and a grim history of repeated violation for the ancient dead. The allure wasn't just about the gold and silver. It was also about the precious resins, oils, and finely woven linens used in mummification, which could be repurposed or sold. The beautifully crafted wooden furniture, the alabaster vessels, the unique amulets all held value in the black market, making every tomb a potential gold mine, even beyond the obvious precious metals. Imagine trying to carefully extract a fragile wooden coffin in the dark. Knowing its contents could either make you rich or get you killed. So, as you quietly reflect on the silent, sun-baked landscape of the ancient Egyptian necropolis, you begin to grasp the profound, deadly allure of its desert's deadly secrets. It was a constant, almost irresistible, temptation for the desperate and the greedy, setting the stage for a brutal conflict between the living and the long dead, where the promise of immense wealth pushed individuals to risk everything against the spiritual and earthly protections of the pharaohs' tombs. You've explored the irresistible allure of ancient Egypt's desert secrets, that powerful temptation to plunder its hidden wealth. Now, let's confront the other side of that gamble the pharaoh's wrath awaits. This is about the terrifying religious and magical consequences that ancient Egyptians believed would befall anyone who dared to desecrate a tomb. A threat so profound, it was meant to deter even the most hardened grave robber. Reaching beyond earthly punishment into the very realm of the afterlife, imagine yourself an ancient Egyptian, living in a society where the divine permeated every aspect of existence. The pharaoh was not just a king, he was a god on earth, a living manifestation of Horus, destined to become Osiris in the afterlife. His tomb, therefore, was not merely a grave but a sacred gateway, a portal to eternity, meticulously prepared to ensure his unending journey and the prosperity of Egypt itself. To violate such a space, to steal from the dead, was not just a crime, it was an act of profound sacrilege, an offense against the gods, against the cosmic order, and against the very fabric of Egyptian belief. The ancient Egyptians believed in a complex afterlife, where the deceased underwent a perilous journey through the Duat underworld to reach the field of reeds paradise. Essential for this journey were the preserved body mummy, the Kayag life force, the Bea soul, and the personal possessions grave goods that provided sustenance and identity. To disturb the tomb, to damage the mummy, or to steal the grave goods was to directly imperil the deceased's eternal journey, potentially condemning them to annihilation, to becoming a restless, tormented spirit in the afterlife. Egyptologists and scholars of ancient Egyptian religion widely confirm the pervasive belief in the spiritual consequences of tomb desecration. noting that these beliefs were deeply ingrained in the funerary practices and served as a powerful deterrent. Alongside physical security measures, this understanding meant that the wrath of the pharaoh, and by extension, the wrath of the gods he embodied, was not just a metaphorical threat. It was believed to be a very real, very potent force, capable of unleashing terrible misfortunes upon the desecrator. Imagine the priest reading ancient texts, describing the tortures awaiting tomb robbers in the afterlife, their names erased from the Book of the Dead, their hearts devoured by Ammit, their souls left to wander as hungry, tormented spirits, never reaching paradise. This spiritual damnation was a fate far worse than any earthly execution. To reinforce this terror, many tombs, particularly those of the pharaohs and high-ranking nobles, contained explicit curses and warnings inscribed on their walls or sarcophagi. These inscriptions were not subtle. They directly threatened any who dared to disturb the burial with a litany of horrifying punishments: blindness, disease, madness, sudden death, famine, and even the annihilation of their own family line. Imagine deciphering such an inscription in the flickering light of your stolen lamp, realizing that the very walls around you were screaming curses at your soul, a particularly chilling, yet common detail was the invocation of specific deities known for their vengeful power. Gods like Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war and pestilence, or Thoth, the god of wisdom and justice, might be called upon to avenge the desecrated tomb. Imagine invoking the wrath of a deity who could unleash plagues or drive you to madness, a constant, unseen hunter pursuing you throughout your blighted life. The fear wasn't just of being caught by human guards, it was of being stalked by divine retribution. The curses often extended beyond the individual robber to their entire family or lineage. This fear of generational damnation was a powerful deterrent. Imagine being a grave robber, finding immense wealth, but knowing that your actions might condemn your children and your children's children to a life of misfortune, illness, or early death. This profound terror, this thought of blighting your own bloodline, was designed to make the gamble of tomb raiding almost unbearable. The Egyptian legal system also reflected this spiritual abhorrence. Tomb robbing was considered a capital crime, punishable by severe torture and public execution. This earthly justice mirrored the divine punishment, creating a comprehensive system of deterrence. But even if you escaped the guards and the executioner, the spiritual curse was believed to pursue you relentlessly, a torment that could last for eternity. So, as you quietly reflect on the pharaoh's wrath awaits, you truly grasp the immense, multi-layered terror that ancient Egyptians sought to instill in any potential grave robber. It wasn't just about protecting gold, it was about safeguarding the very journey of the deceased into eternity, fiercely defended by the gods themselves, ensuring that any who dared to violate the sacred resting place would face a terrifying, relentless, and often eternal divine retribution. You've confronted the terrifying spiritual consequences of incurring the pharaoh's wrath. Now, let's consider the more tangible, yet equally formidable deterrents put in place to protect ancient Egyptian tomb security's deadly game. This is about the elaborate physical defenses, the cunning traps, and the intricate architectural puzzles that were designed to thwart grave robbers, turning the very journey into the afterlife into a perilous gauntlet for any would-be plunderer. Imagine standing before the entrance of a high-status Egyptian tomb, perhaps a royal burial in the Valley of the Kings. The entrance might be deceptively small, almost invisible, cut into the sheer rock face. This wasn't just about secrecy, it was the first line of defense. The very act of finding the hidden entrance required immense knowledge, careful observation, or perhaps insider information, turning the quest for treasure into a daunting intellectual puzzle once discovered. The path into the tomb was rarely a straight shot. Ancient Egyptian architects were masters of misdirection and obstruction. You might encounter false passages, designed to lead robbers astray into dead ends, wasting their precious time and resources. Imagine crawling through a dark, dusty tunnel for hours, only to find it abruptly terminates in solid rock. Knowing you've been fooled by a clever deception, the frustration alone would be immense, and the risk of being caught by patrols would increase with every wasted moment. Egyptologists and forensic archaeologists often highlight the ingenuity of ancient Egyptian tomb builders in creating complex defensive systems, though they also note that many of these physical defenses were ultimately overcome by persistent and often well-informed grave robbers. Then came the blockages and fill material after the burial. Passages and burial chambers were often meticulously filled with thousands of tons of rubble, sand, and stone chips. Imagine trying to dig through that in pitch darkness, with only rudimentary tools. This wasn't just about physical exertion, it was about creating a deterrent so immense that only the most determined and well-equipped teams could hope to penetrate it. The sheer volume of material was a testament to the immense resources invested in protecting the dead. A particularly chilling, yet common, detail was the use of massive stone portcullises. These were enormous, multi-ton slabs of stone, carefully suspended above key passages or chambers, designed to be dropped into place once the burial was complete, effectively sealing off the inner parts of the tomb. Imagine the precision required to install such a colossal stone, and the terrifying finality as it thudded into place, permanently barring the way for a grave robber. Encountering such a barrier would mean hours, perhaps days, of backbreaking, incredibly risky labor to attempt to bypass it if it was even possible. Sometimes, the internal structure of tombs incorporated sliding blocks or rolling boulders. These were large, heavy stones or spherical boulders strategically placed in inclined passages, designed to be released by a trip mechanism, rolling down the passage to crush or trap any intruder. Imagine painstakingly navigating a narrow passage, only for the floor to subtly shift, triggering a colossal stone that would seal you in forever. Or worse, crush you to death? These were silent, deadly guardians, turning the tomb into its own execution chamber. The sheer complexity of the tomb layout itself was a form of defense. Royal tombs, especially in the New Kingdom, became vast, labyrinthine complexes with multiple corridors, chambers, shafts, and false burial pits. The goal was to confuse and exhaust robbers, leading them through an intricate maze where they would eventually give up or become lost, sealing their own fate within the dark passages. You wouldn't just walk in, you'd need a map or incredible luck to navigate the deceptive turns and false leads, a peculiar, often overlooked detail was the strategic placement of decoys and false sarcophagi. Some tombs contained empty chambers or sarcophagi, designed to trick robbers into believing they had found the main burial, only for them to waste their time and effort on nothing. This clever psychological warfare aimed to exhaust the plunderers' patience and resources, leading them to abandon the true, still hidden treasures. It's like a cosmic game of hide and seek. With death as the stakes, even the curse inscriptions on the walls, while primarily spiritual, served as a psychological deterrent, a form of security's deadly game. Knowing that the very air you breathed within the tomb was imbued with dire warnings and promises of divine wrath would wear on the nerves, perhaps causing superstitious robbers to abandon their quest, fearing the supernatural consequences more than the earthly guards. So, as you quietly reflect on the intricate, often brutal, defenses of ancient Egyptian tombs, you begin to grasp the constant conflict between the desire for eternal rest and the human temptation for plunder. Security's deadly game was played out in the dark, silent passages, where massive stone blocks, cunning traps, and architectural trickery transformed the very pathway to the afterlife into a perilous gauntlet. often ensuring that those who dared to disturb the pharaoh's rest would meet their own grim end. You've confronted the terrifying spiritual consequences of incurring the pharaoh's wrath. Now, let's consider the more tangible, yet equally formidable, deterrents put in place to protect ancient Egyptian tombs, security's deadly game. This is about the elaborate physical defenses, the cunning traps, and the intricate architectural puzzles that were designed to thwart grave robbers. Turning the very journey into the afterlife into a perilous gauntlet for any would-be plunderer. Imagine standing before the entrance of a high-status Egyptian tomb, perhaps a royal burial in the Valley of the Kings. The entrance might be deceptively small, almost invisible, cut into the sheer rock face. This wasn't just about secrecy, it was the first line of defense. The very act of finding the hidden entrance required immense knowledge, careful observation, or perhaps insider information. Turning the quest for treasure into a daunting intellectual puzzle, once discovered, the path into the tomb was rarely a straight shot. Ancient Egyptian architects were masters of misdirection and obstruction. You might encounter false passages, designed to lead robbers astray into dead ends, wasting their precious time and resources. Imagine crawling through a dark, dusty tunnel for hours, only to find it abruptly terminates in solid rock. Knowing you've been fooled by a clever deception, the frustration alone would be immense, and the risk of being caught by patrols would increase with every wasted moment. Egyptologists and forensic archaeologists often highlight the ingenuity of ancient Egyptian tomb builders in creating complex defensive systems, though they also note that many of these physical defenses were ultimately overcome by persistent and often well-informed grave robbers. Then came the blockages and fill material. After the burial, passages and burial chambers were often meticulously filled with thousands of tons of rubble, sand, and stone chips. Imagine trying to dig through that in pitch darkness, with only rudimentary tools. This wasn't just about physical exertion, it was about creating a deterrent so immense that only the most determined and well-equipped teams could hope to penetrate it. The sheer volume of material was a testament to the immense resources invested in protecting the dead. A particularly chilling, yet common detail was the use of massive stone portcullises. These were enormous, multi-ton slabs of stone, carefully suspended above key passages or chambers, designed to be dropped into place once the burial was complete, effectively sealing off the inner parts of the tomb. Imagine the precision required to install such a colossal stone, and the terrifying finality as it thudded into place, permanently barring the way for a grave robber. Encountering such a barrier would mean hours, perhaps days, of backbreaking, incredibly risky labor to attempt to bypass it, if it was even possible. Sometimes the internal structure of tombs incorporated sliding blocks or rolling boulders. These were large, heavy stones or spherical boulders strategically placed in inclined passages, designed to be released by a trip mechanism, rolling down the passage to crush or trap any intruder. Imagine painstakingly navigating a narrow passage, only for the floor to subtly shift, triggering a colossal stone that would seal you in forever, or worse, crush you to death. These were silent, deadly guardians, turning the tomb into its own execution chamber. The sheer complexity of the tomb layout itself was a form of defense. Royal tombs, especially in the New Kingdom, became vast, labyrinthine complexes with multiple corridors, chambers, shafts, and false burial pits. The goal was to confuse and exhaust robbers, leading them through an intricate maze where they would eventually give up or become lost, sealing their own fate within the dark passages. You wouldn't just walk in, you'd need a map or incredible luck to navigate the deceptive turns and false leads. A peculiar, often overlooked detail was the strategic placement of decoys and false sarcophagi. Some tombs contained empty chambers or sarcophagi, designed to trick robbers into believing they had found the main burial. only for them to waste their time and effort on nothing. This clever psychological warfare aimed to exhaust the plunderers' patience and resources, leading them to abandon the true, still hidden treasures. It's like a cosmic game of hide and seek. With death as the stakes, even the curse inscriptions on the walls, while primarily spiritual, served as a psychological deterrent, a form of security's deadly game, knowing that the very air you breathed within the tomb was imbued with dire warnings and promises of divine wrath would wear on the nerves, perhaps causing superstitious robbers to abandon their quest, fearing the supernatural consequences more than the earthly guards. So, as you quietly reflect on the intricate, often brutal, defenses of ancient Egyptian tombs, you begin to grasp the constant conflict between the desire for eternal rest and the human temptation for plunder. Security's deadly game was played out in the dark. Silent passages, where massive stone blocks, cunning traps, and architectural trickery transformed the very pathway to the afterlife into a perilous gauntlet, often ensuring that those who dared to disturb the pharaoh's rest would meet their own grim end. You've witnessed the unsettling reality of grave robbers' desecration, a physical violation that disturbed the peace of the dead. Now, let's confront an equally unsettling, though often legitimate, post-mortem fate dissections unveiling. This is about the unsettling practice of human bodies being used for anatomical study, a vital step in the advancement of medicine, but one that stripped the deceased of their dignity and exposed them to a very public, often gruesome, posthumous performance. Imagine yourself in the nascent days of anatomical science, perhaps in a medical school of the 16th or 17th century. Your body, acquired from a grave robber or delivered from a gallows, is now laid out on a cold, stone slab in an anatomy theater. This is a far cry from a peaceful resting place. Instead, you become an object of study, your physical form meticulously, publicly, unveiled for the sake of scientific knowledge. The primary purpose of anatomical dissection was to understand the human body. Before widespread dissection, medical knowledge was largely based on ancient texts and philosophical speculation. But as the Renaissance ushered in a new era of scientific inquiry, physicians and scholars yearned to directly observe the intricate workings of the human form. This quest for knowledge led to an insatiable demand for cadavers, a demand that traditional, legal sources like executed criminals simply couldn't meet. Medical historians universally acknowledge the critical role of anatomical dissection in the development of modern medicine, marking a pivotal shift from theoretical understanding to empirical observation. Despite the ethical and social controversies surrounding cadaver acquisition for centuries, the typical setting for a dissection was an anatomy theater. These were often semicircular amphitheatrical spaces, allowing dozens, sometimes hundreds, of students and even curious members of the public to observe the procedure. Imagine being the central focus of such a spectacle. Students would lean forward, eager to learn, while a master anatomist, perhaps a figure like Andreas Vesalius, meticulously cut and explored, describing each muscle, organ, and bone in detail. Your body, once a living person, was now a teaching tool, a silent, unwilling participant in a public lecture, a particularly gruesome, yet common. Detail was the lack of preservation methods. In the early days, bodies could not be effectively preserved. This meant dissections had to be conducted quickly, often within days of death, before decomposition became too advanced. Imagine the smell in the unventilated theater, the rapid decay as the dissection progressed, making the work both challenging and profoundly unpleasant for all involved. The urgency of the work meant that every moment counted before the body became unusable. The process of dissection itself was brutal by modern standards, while aimed at precision. Early anatomical tools were rudimentary. The cuts were often deep and broad, systematically exposing layers of muscle, organs, and bone, your body would be dismembered. Its parts meticulously examined, weighed, and sometimes even drawn by artists to create anatomical atlases. This systematic deconstruction of the human form, while invaluable for science, was a profound act of depersonalization, reducing you from an individual to a collection of biological components. The ethical considerations of dissection were immense. For centuries, religious and societal taboos against disturbing the dead made access to bodies extremely difficult. Only the corpses of executed criminals were typically sanctioned for dissection, often as an additional form of posthumous punishment. This scarcity, as we touched on with grave robbing, led to the booming black market for cadavers. So, if your body ended up on the dissection table, it was likely acquired through illicit means. A final indignity. You might hear whispers among the public, a mixture of fascination and revulsion, about the bodies being stolen or resurrected for these anatomical demonstrations. The fear of ending up on a dissection table was real for many, adding another layer of terror to the medieval and early modern experience of death. It was a chilling thought that even after burial, your body might not be safe, destined instead for public dismemberment in the name of science. So, as you quietly reflect on dissection's unveiling, you begin to grasp why being a corpse in medieval and early modern times could be a profoundly awful experience. Your body was not just food for worms, it was a potential object of scientific study. Stripped of its dignity, publicly dismembered, and ultimately used as a tool in the relentless quest for medical knowledge. Forever losing its right to a peaceful, undisturbed rest, you've witnessed the unsettling reality of dissection's unveiling, where a corpse became a scientific specimen. Now, let's explore the other side of that coin, the very specific and dangerous motivation that drove many ancient Egyptian grave robbers the black market's shadow. This is about the vast, illicit trade networks that fueled the demand for stolen grave goods, transforming sacred artifacts into commodities and creating a dark economy that thrived on tomb desecration. Imagine a bustling, dimly lit back alley in ancient Thebes, far from the watchful eyes of temple guards and royal patrols. The air is thick with secrets, hushed whispers, and the faint clinking of metal. Here, away from the legitimate markets, a dangerous trade unfolds. This is where grave robbers, their faces perhaps still smudged with the dust of a recently violated tomb, would bring their illicit gains gold amulets, shimmering jewelry, rare alabaster jars, and finely crafted wooden statues, all fresh from the eternal sleep of the dead. The demand for these stolen treasures was immense and constant. Wealthy individuals, both within Egypt and in neighboring lands, desired the exotic and precious artifacts for their own collections, for personal adornment, or simply as a display of status. Imagine a rich merchant in Babylon, willing to pay a king's ransom for an authentic Egyptian golden scarab, completely unconcerned with its sacrilegious origins. This external demand created a powerful economic incentive for tomb raiding, turning the sacred wealth of the afterlife into a highly profitable, albeit deadly, business. Egyptologists and economic historians frequently highlight the intricate black market networks that operated in ancient Egypt, demonstrating how tomb robbing was not merely individual opportunism, but a sophisticated criminal enterprise with established supply and demand chains. This complexity underscores the challenges faced by ancient authorities. The trade often involved multiple layers of intermediaries. A grave robber, directly involved in the dangerous act of breaking into a tomb, might not be the one selling the goods to the end buyer. Instead, they would sell to a fence or a middleman, someone with connections to wealthier merchants who could discreetly move the goods through various channels, perhaps across the Nile, or even over land and sea routes to distant kingdoms. This network provided anonymity for the actual robbers, but it also meant they received only a fraction of the final value. Reflecting the immense risk they undertook, A particularly insidious detail was the involvement of corrupt officials. Evidence from ancient Egyptian court records, such as the tomb robbery papyri from the late New Kingdom, reveals that sometimes tomb guardians, priests, or even high-ranking scribes were complicit in these schemes. Imagine a tomb guard, paid to protect the dead, turning a blind eye, or even actively assisting a robbing crew in exchange for a share of the loot. This internal corruption made the black market incredibly difficult to police, as the very people entrusted with protection were sometimes part of the problem. It's like the foxes guarding the henhouse. But with far higher stakes, the nature of the goods themselves also fueled the black market. Items made of gold, silver, and precious stones were easily melted down or broken into smaller, untraceable pieces, making them perfect for illicit trade. Imagine a beautiful golden mask, intended for a pharaoh's eternal visage, being melted down into anonymous ingots, its artistic and historical value utterly lost, all for quick cash. The same went for fine linen, valuable resins, or exotic woods, all highly prized commodities that found eager buyers. The trade was clandestine, operating under the cloak of night and secrecy. Meetings would take place in hidden courtyards, secluded desert oases, or on barges under the cover of darkness. Every transaction was fraught with danger, the risk of being caught by patrols, betrayed by a partner, or cheated by a dishonest buyer. The constant tension of the black market was a daily reality for anyone involved. You might hear whispers of a newly rich family in a distant city, their sudden wealth vaguely attributed to foreign trade, but with an underlying suspicion that it came from illicit dealings. The black market left its own subtle, invisible trail across the ancient world, connecting desperate robbers to greedy buyers through a chain of sacrilege and silent transactions. So, as you quietly reflect on the black market's shadow, you begin to grasp the constant conflict that plagued ancient Egyptian necropolis. The immense wealth of the dead created an irresistible temptation, fueling a vast illicit trade network that turned sacred burial goods into commodities, ensuring that the miserable life of a grave robber was one of perpetual danger, profound sacrilege, and, for a lucky few, fleeting, ill-gotten gains. You've explored the insidious reach of the black market, turning sacred grave goods into illicit commodities. Now, let's delve into the grim reality of who became a grave robber in ancient Egypt and why. This isn't about cartoon villains, it's about the desperate, often tragic, motivations that drove ordinary people to commit such a heinous and dangerous crime, transforming them from despair to depravity. Imagine living in ancient Egypt, a land of immense splendor and monumental achievements, but also a land of stark social stratification. For the vast majority of the population, life was a relentless struggle. You might be a peasant farmer, your livelihood dependent on the unpredictable flooding of the Nile. A bad harvest, a prolonged drought, or a heavy tax burden could plunge your family into immediate destitution. Or perhaps you were a craftsman, a laborer, living hand to mouth, and a sudden illness or injury rendered you unable to work, leaving your family facing starvation. These were the grim realities that pushed ordinary people to extraordinary, desperate acts. For many, the path to grave robbing began not with greed, but with abject poverty and desperation. When your children are hungry, when your family faces eviction, when illness threatens to claim your loved ones, the moral line between right and wrong can blur. The tombs, filled with gleaming gold and precious goods, represented an escape from this brutal reality, a tempting solution to seemingly insurmountable problems. Imagine watching your child sicken from hunger, knowing that just a few hours daring in the desert could provide the food and medicine they desperately needed. That kind of pressure could break even the most devout. Egyptologists and social historians frequently emphasize the link between economic hardship, particularly during periods of political instability or famine, and documented spikes in tomb robbing, suggesting desperation as a primary motivator for many common robbers. A particularly insidious detail was the lack of social mobility. For most ancient Egyptians, you were born into your station, and you largely remained there. The prospect of earning immense wealth through honest labor was practically non-existent for the common person. Grave robbing, despite its terrifying risks, offered a forbidden shortcut, a chance to transcend the rigid social hierarchy. However fleetingly, it was a gamble for a better life. However morally bankrupt, consider the life of a typical laborer who might turn to grave robbing. They were already accustomed to hard physical work, digging, lifting, moving heavy stones. This made them ideal candidates for the arduous task of excavating tomb entrances and breaching blockages. Imagine a former quarry worker, now using their skills not to build monuments for the living, but to dismantle the eternal homes of the dead, driven by the sheer necessity of survival. Their very skills, once honorable, were now perverted for criminal ends. The involvement of disillusioned tomb builders or guards also speaks to this desperation. These individuals possessed invaluable insider knowledge about tomb layouts, hidden entrances, and defensive mechanisms. They knew where the treasure was, and crucially, how to get to it. If their wages were insufficient, or if they felt unjustly treated, their unique knowledge became a powerful, corrupting temptation. Imagine a frustrated tomb builder who spent years constructing a pharaoh's eternal resting place, now using that intimate knowledge to strip it bare, fueled by bitterness and a desperate desire for what they felt they were owed. This insider betrayal underscores a shift from honor to depravity, a peculiar yet common. Detail was the involvement of entire families or small, close-knit groups. Grave robbing was often a communal effort, requiring multiple hands for digging, hauling, and keeping watch. This meant that the desperation could be shared and the moral transgression became a collective act, perhaps rationalized as survival. Imagine a father convincing his sons to join him in such a dangerous endeavor, telling them it was the only way to save their family from destitution, a chilling perversion of familial love. The transition from a desperate act to a form of depravity often happened gradually. The initial horror of desecrating a sacred space might fade with repeated exposure, replaced by a hardened cynicism. The thrill of the illicit gain, the constant tension, and the camaraderie of the criminal enterprise could create a dangerous new identity. The grave robber, initially driven by despair, might eventually become a hardened criminal, detached from the spiritual ramifications, focused solely on the brutal realities of their dangerous trade. So, as you quietly reflect on the harrowing journey from despair to depravity, you begin to understand the complex motivations behind grave robbing in ancient Egypt. It wasn't always simple greed. It was often the brutal hand of poverty, the crushing weight of circumstance, and the desperate hope for survival that pushed ordinary people to commit extraordinary, sacrilegious acts, transforming them into figures who literally stole from the dead to feed the living. You've explored the desperate motivations that pushed ordinary people into the depths of grave robbing, driven from despair to depravity. Now, let's go directly into the heart of their illicit operations, experiencing the myriad dangers and terrifying risks faced by these clandestine figures, the perils of the night. This isn't just about earthly punishment. It's about the ever-present threat of discovery, the harshness of the desert environment, and the gnawing fear of divine retribution that stalked every step of an ancient Egyptian grave robber's grim work. Imagine yourself as part of a grave robbing crew. The sun has just set, casting long, eerie shadows across the vast, silent necropolis. The desert air, still warm from the day's heat, slowly begins to cool, and the first stars prick through the deepening twilight. This is your time. You move stealthily, your tools muffled, your senses heightened. Every rustle of dry brush, every distant howl of a jackal, a potential sign of discovery. The stillness of the desert is deceptive. It amplifies every sound, every whisper, making the silence itself a source of profound anxiety. The most immediate peril was the risk of detection by tomb guards or patrols. Pharaohs and wealthy nobles employed dedicated guards to protect their burial grounds. These patrols, often well-armed, would conduct regular rounds, especially at night. Imagine crawling through a narrow rock-cut passage, the air thick with dust, when you suddenly hear the faint sound of voices, or the distant flicker of torches. Your heart would pound. Discovery meant instant capture, brutal interrogation, and almost certain death. Every shadow became a potential hiding place, every moment a desperate gamble. Egyptologists and legal historians often refer to ancient Egyptian court documents, such as the tomb robbery papyri from the New Kingdom, which provide detailed accounts of grave robbers' confessions, revealing their methods, the dangers they faced, and the severe penalties they incurred. These rare primary sources offer invaluable insights into the daily realities of their criminal enterprise. Then there was the sheer physical danger of the tombs themselves. These were not simple holes in the ground. As we discussed, they were designed with elaborate defenses, collapsing ceilings, hidden pits, massive stone portcullises meant to drop and crush intruders. Imagine navigating a pitch-black passage, illuminated only by a flickering oil lamp, wary of every step, every creak of the ancient stone. A single misstep could trigger a trap, sealing you in forever or crushing you to death beneath tons of rock. The very architecture of the tomb was an active, deadly enemy, designed for your demise. The harshness of the desert environment added another layer of peril. The nights could be surprisingly cold, especially after a scorching day. You risked exposure, dehydration if you got lost, and the presence of dangerous desert wildlife scorpions, venomous snakes, or even hungry jackals. Imagine the constant thirst, the biting wind, and the knowledge that a simple snake bite in the darkness could mean a slow, agonizing death, far from any help. The desert itself was a silent, unforgiving accomplice to the tomb's defenses. A particularly insidious danger was the threat of betrayal from within your own crew. Grave robbing was a high-stakes, highly illegal enterprise. Trust was a rare commodity. A partner might turn on you for a larger share of the loot, or to save themselves from punishment if captured. Imagine working shoulder to shoulder in the dark, your lives depending on each other, while a sliver of suspicion gnawed at your gut, wondering if the man beside you would be the one to betray you to the authorities. The paranoia would be immense, turning even your allies into potential threats. The lack of proper tools and safety measures meant that every operation was incredibly risky. Grave robbers often used rudimentary equipment: iron chisels, wooden levers, ropes made from animal hide. Breaching thick stone blockages or carefully removing layers of fill material was arduous and inherently dangerous. A miscalculated blow, a crumbling tunnel, or heavy stone shifting could lead to a cave-in, burying you alive in the very tomb you sought to plunder. Your body, already destined to disturb the dead, would join them in an unplanned, unmarked grave. And then, there was the constant, gnawing fear of the curse. Even the most hardened grave robber, driven by desperation, likely carried a sliver of superstition. They knew the dire warnings inscribed on tomb walls, the tales of divine retribution, every unexplained illness, every family misfortune, every close call with a patrol might be attributed to the pharaoh's curse, a spiritual malignancy clinging to them like the desert dust. This psychological burden, the terror of divine vengeance, made every successful plunder a terrifying gamble with their immortal soul. You might hear a robber whisper a quick, desperate prayer for protection, even as they violated a sacred space. So, as you quietly reflect on the perils of the night, you truly grasp the miserable life of an ancient Egyptian grave robber. Every clandestine operation was a desperate gamble against detection. Physical danger, environmental hazards, human betrayal, and the relentless terror of divine curses, making their nightly expeditions a harrowing journey into the depths of fear and desperation. You've explored the harrowing perils faced by grave robbers operating under the cloak of night. Now, let's consider the terrifying consequences if their luck ran out. If they were caught in the act, or implicated in a tomb robbery, we're going to delve into justice's brutal hand, uncovering the horrific punishments meted out to caught tomb raiders in ancient Egypt, a testament to the severity of their crime and the state's unwavering commitment to protecting the sacred dead. Imagine yourself as an unlucky grave robber, caught red-handed as you emerge from a desecrated tomb, perhaps covered in dust and clutching a stolen amulet. The immediate discovery would be followed by swift, brutal apprehension. There was no concept of innocent until proven guilty in the modern sense. The evidence of your presence at a violated tomb was often enough. You would be immediately arrested by tomb guards or local authorities. Your short-lived career of plunder abruptly and violently ended. The first phase of this brutal justice would often be interrogation, which frequently involved torture. Ancient Egyptian court documents, particularly the tomb robbery papyri from the New Kingdom, provide chilling accounts of suspects being interrogated with the stick and the palm ribs. This meant severe beatings, designed to extract confessions and to reveal accomplices and the location of stolen goods. Imagine the agonizing pain, the relentless blows, the desperate pleas. As you were forced to confess your crimes, betray your partners, and reveal the location of every hidden treasure, the physical torment was designed to break your will and ensure every secret was unearthed. Egyptologists and legal historians widely confirm the use of torture in ancient Egyptian judicial processes, particularly for severe crimes like tomb robbery, as a means to extract confessions and obtain information about co-conspirators and stolen goods. These practices reflect the often brutal nature of ancient legal systems. Once a confession was extracted, and often after the stolen goods were recovered and your accomplices identified, you would face a trial. These trials were often swift, conducted by local officials or royal magistrates, while there might be some semblance of presenting evidence. The outcome was frequently predetermined, especially if torture had already secured a confession. Your fate was effectively sealed the moment you were apprehended. You wouldn't get a lawyer. You wouldn't get a fair hearing as we understand it. Justice was swift and severe. The punishments for tomb robbery were among the harshest in ancient Egypt, reflecting the profound sacrilege of the crime. The most common and terrifying penalty was execution. This wasn't a quick, clean death. Methods of execution could be brutal and designed for public deterrence. You might be impaled, a horrifying death where a stake was driven through your body, or perhaps you would be burned alive, a truly agonizing end. Imagine the screams, the smoke, and the public spectacle. Designed to send a chilling message to anyone who might consider violating the resting places of the dead. Your death was meant to be a terrifying lesson for all, a particularly grim, yet common. Detail was the denial of a proper burial as a grave robber. You were already seen as an affront to the divine order. Your body might be left unburied, exposed to the sun and scavenging animals in the desert, or buried in unconsecrated ground, denied the mummification and rituals necessary for a prosperous afterlife. This was a direct reversal of the very afterlife you sought to steal from others. A profound cosmic justice where your own eternal journey was irrevocably blighted. Imagine your spirit wandering endlessly, without a body, without grave goods, without remembrance, condemned to oblivion, beyond execution. Some punishments involved mutilation. You might have your hands or feet chopped off, rendering you unable to commit future robberies or work as a laborer. This was a public branding, a permanent mark of your crime, condemning you to a life of disability and social ostracization. Imagine living with such a grotesque reminder of your transgression, a constant testament to the brutal hand of justice. The property of convicted grave robbers could also be confiscated, leaving their families destitute and facing ruin. This added another layer of deterrence, knowing that your crimes would not only destroy your own life, but also blight the lives of your innocent loved ones. The long reach of justice extended far beyond the individual offender. You might hear whispers in the marketplace about a recently caught gang of robbers. Their brutal punishments recounted in hushed, fearful tones. These stories, spread quickly through the community, served as powerful cautionary tales, reinforcing the immense risks and severe consequences of daring to plunder the sacred dead. The fear of justice's brutal hand was a tangible deterrent, perhaps even more so than the fear of ancient curses. So, as you quietly reflect on justice's brutal hand, you truly understand why being a grave robber in ancient Egypt was a miserable life, often ending in unimaginable horror, from agonizing torture to public execution and the denial of your own afterlife. The state ensured that those who dared to violate the sanctity of the tombs would pay the ultimate, brutal price. A chilling testament to Egypt's unwavering commitment to protecting its sacred dead. You've explored the grim realities of justice's brutal hand, where grave robbers faced torture and execution. Now, as our journey through the miserable life of an ancient Egyptian grave robber gently draws to a close, let's reflect on the profound, enduring conflict between preservation and plunder. A struggle as old as the tombs themselves' eternal rest. Disturbed dreams. This is about the continuous battle to protect the legacy of the dead from the relentless desires of the living. A conflict that echoes from ancient Egypt into our modern world. Imagine, one final time, the silent, sun-baked landscape of the Egyptian necropolis. For the ancient Egyptians, the tombs were built for eternal rest. They represented a sacred pact the living would honor and provide for the dead. And in return, the deceased would journey peacefully through the afterlife, ensuring cosmic order and continued prosperity for Egypt. The meticulous mummification, the lavish grave goods, the elaborate defenses all were designed to guarantee an undisturbed eternity. The very purpose of existence for many revolved around ensuring this peaceful transition. But against this profound desire for eternal rest stood the enduring temptation of plunder. For those living in poverty, or for the corrupt, the immense wealth accumulated in the tombs was an irresistible magnet. This created a relentless, millennia-long conflict. On one side, the desire for spiritual peace and cosmic order. On the other, the stark realities of human greed and desperation. This conflict was often a brutal, silent war waged under the cover of night. Between the living guardians and the opportunistic dead, Egyptologists and cultural heritage experts widely acknowledge that tomb robbing has been a persistent issue throughout ancient Egyptian history and continues to be a problem for modern archaeological sites, highlighting the ongoing tension between preserving heritage and the economic motivations for illicit trade. Consider the countless tombs that were indeed plundered, many within a few generations of their construction. This isn't just about a few individual acts of theft. It's about a systemic issue that fundamentally altered the archaeological record. The majority of pharaonic tombs, even those with elaborate defenses, were eventually breached. Imagine the frustration of ancient priests and kings, constantly devising new methods of concealment and protection, only to see them ultimately fail against persistent human ingenuity and avarice. It was a disheartening, ongoing defeat for the forces of preservation. A particularly poignant detail is the practice of reinterring or rewrapping pharaohs and high priests in hidden caches during later dynasties. Faced with rampant tomb robbing, the priests of the 21st dynasty, for example, took the desperate measure of moving the mummies of past pharaohs from their desecrated tombs in the Valley of the Kings to secret, unmarked communal burial sites. Like the Deir el-Bahari cache, this was an admission of defeat for the original security measures, a grim acknowledgement that even a pharaoh's eternal rest could be, and had been, disturbed. It's like a cosmic witness protection program for the dead. hoping to finally give them peace, the modern era, while bringing scientific archaeology. Also brought its own form of plunder in the early days of Egyptology, while driven by scientific curiosity. Early European excavators often removed artifacts from Egypt without proper documentation or regard for local heritage, sometimes even causing damage in their rush to unearth treasures. This historical reality adds another layer of complexity to the narrative of eternal rest. Disturbed dreams, highlighting how different motivations, both ancient and modern, could disrupt the sanctity of ancient burials. You can almost feel the quiet sadness that permeates the plundered tombs today. When you walk through a royal burial chamber that was clearly robbed in antiquity, the absence of the sarcophagus lid, the scattered fragments, the dark scorch marks from ancient lamps, all speak of violation. It's a powerful reminder that even the most grand designs for eternity could not always withstand the relentless desires of the living. So, as you quietly reflect on the timeless conflict between eternal rest and disturbed dreams, you grasp the persistent human fascination with what lies beyond the veil, and the immense value we place on both material wealth and spiritual continuity. The miserable life of a grave robber, fueled by desperation and greed, stands as a stark contrast to the grand visions of the pharaohs, a chilling testament to the enduring struggle between the sacred and the profane. A battle fought endlessly in the silent sands of ancient Egypt, leaving its echoes for millennia.